We need to get started with this session. We have two speakers in this session who will be speaking on generally the issue of Islam and Mormonism, points of cooperation. And by the way, as I'm discovering right now, I might want to just note for my presenters, this microphone is really strange, so when you speak right into it, everybody can hear, and when you look away just slightly, nobody can hear anymore. So our first presenter is Dan Peterson, who's a professor of Islamic Studies and Arabic at Brigham Young University. He currently serves as editor-in-chief of Brigham Young University's Middle Eastern Text Initiative, which you can see examples of in the back, which will be whisked away in very near future. So if you want to take a look at that, that would be great. He's a member of the Executive Council of the Neal A. Maxwell Institute for Religious Scholarship at BYU, and the author of several books, including Abraham Divided, an LDS Perspective on the Middle East, and the critically acclaimed Muhammed, Prophet of God, from Erdman's Publishing. Our second speaker is Mohammed Mehtar, who's the Imam of the Islamic Society of Greater Salt Lake. He was born in South Africa and immigrated to the United States in 1985. He attended university in Southern California, completing his secular studies in 2001. Thereafter, he pursued a religious education and graduated in the sciences of Islamic theology in 2007. With over 20 years of service to secular and religious fields, Imam Muhammad has joined the Islamic Society of the Greater Salt Lake City and has been actively involved in interfaith dialogue. As part of his responsibilities, he presents to schools, university programs, and educates youth of all denominations about Muslim identity in the 21st century. So please welcome Dr. Peterson and Imam Mehtar.
Want me to go first? How long do you want me to go?
Take
15 minutes, okay. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Already, various people came to me with various excuses for not attending my lecture. I had a large contingent of the Muslims had to go off for prayer. A group of UVU administrators had to go off for a meeting. Blair Van Dyke invented some Boy Scout trip that he had to leave for. I thought, okay, I get the message. But it's a pleasure to be here, and I just want to say I think this has been a delightful, really, really good conference, and at some points genuinely moving. And I want to thank particularly Boyd and Brian for putting it on. It's a marvelous thing. I've been asked to talk a little bit about this translation project that I do, some of which you can see there on the table at the back. It's something that started off as what we call the Islamic Translation Series, and then it morphed into something bigger that we now call the Middle Eastern Texts Initiative. That, I don't know, that just sounded classy and something or other. But we wanted a broader umbrella term. Let me tell you a little bit about how it began. When I was in graduate school, one of the things that I noticed was that there were very few of the standard, or the really centrally important texts of the Islamic tradition that were available in reliable, accessible English translations. And so it often led to a distorted picture of the Islamic world in the minds of people in the West. For example, one of my fields is the history of philosophy, history of science. I would read books about the history of philosophy, and they would say something to the effect that, well, the Greeks did a lot of really interesting things. Then the Arabs inherited the philosophical and scientific texts of the Greeks and passed them on without adding anything of any significance to the West, which then proceeded to add all sorts of wonderful things and make new discoveries. And I think, well, first of all, that isn't true. Secondly, where do you get this from? And it made me a little angry. And then I'd looked through the books and I'd noticed that, for example, there were no footnotes in Arabic. There was no indication that these people had read the texts they were dismissing as making no contribution. And I thought, well, how in the world can you be so arrogant as to make that judgment? And then it began to dawn on me that it wasn't so much their fault as it was the fault of the specialists who had never told the story adequately, had not made the texts available. So we really couldn't blame them for making these incorrect judgments about the legacy of Arab Islamic civilization. And so it seemed to me that it was obvious that someone needed to tell that story, someone needed to make the texts available. When I came to BYU, one of the things that surprised me right away was that someone in the philosophy department came to me and wanted to know if I'd be willing to teach a course on Islamic philosophy regularly, every year. Well, those sorts of courses just aren't taught very often anywhere. And so the thought that it could be done at BYU was a wonderful thing. This was an area that I'd worked in. I soon found there was a problem, which was that many of the basic texts that you would want to use in such a course, in fact, didn't exist in English. And usually my students were, well, never was their Arabic up to the level that they could read Arabic philosophical texts cold and get much out of them. We'd spend an entire term on a few pages. That might be worthwhile, but it wouldn't be a very good survey of the field. So that made it all the more urgent that some of these texts be translated. We have now, by the way, created enough books that we can use them in the class. So it's a bit of a laborious way to go about it, but there you have it. What happened was that a member of the leadership of the LDS Church, Alexander Morrison, a member of the First Quorum of the 70 at the time, who's now emeritus, came down. Well, he called me up one day and wanted to know if we could meet, if we could discuss things that the university could do that the church could not do directly. It would be seen as threatening if the church got involved in any of this. But if there was something the university could do that would send a message of genuine respect to the Islamic world. This was pre-9/11. It wasn't quite so urgent then, or it didn't seem to be. Nevertheless, it was a wonderful idea. We talked about a number of things. One of my favorite ideas, I proposed to him that there be an endowed chair of Islamic studies at BYU, thinking that the competition was fairly thin and the odds were good that I would get it. But the idea that he really liked and took back with him was the idea of a translation series. He was himself a former academic from Canada, and he took the idea to the church leadership, who approved it but did not approve any funding. It was what you call in government terms an unfunded mandate. Yes, go do this, and raise the money for it. So I spent the first several years of the project basically with my hand out. I felt like a TV evangelist. I'll personally pray over each of your love gifts if you will send me money. Finally, some people did begin to come through with money, and we were able to start the program or the project. And I have to say, some things worked together amazingly well. One of the problems was how to do, in the new computer age, how to do Arabic word processing. Well, it turned out at the time that the best Arabic word processing software in the world was a program called El-Katib, and it had been created by a neighbor of mine who lived literally 4 houses down the street. He was my home teacher. For those of you, in the LDS Church, you'll know what that means. I just thought, what are the odds of this? And it was a marvelous project. It put us way ahead of anybody else. I remember once when Oxford University Press published a book of the so-called history of the principles of the opinions of the citizens of the virtuous city by Al-Farabi in a dual language edition. It was absolutely ghastly ugly, put out by Oxford University Press, which normally does very classy looking books. Well, this was typewritten on the English side, and on the facing page was this spidery scrawl by this German professor of Arabic, Richard Walzer. It was just ugly. And the head of humanities computing at Oxford came to BYU once, and I said, hey, I want to show you something. Took her to my office, chose a paragraph in that book, which she agreed was really ugly, and typed it into the computer, my little Mac, and printed it off on my printer there in this elegant Arabic that we could do. And she was suitably abashed and humiliated. It was a very satisfying moment. I had paid a lot of money for that book, and it was ugly. So we had a head start, really, in a way, because we had this technological edge. And we eventually put together a team of translators. Still, people are volunteering texts, and have been able to put out now, I think, in the total Middle Eastern Text Initiative project, about I keep meaning to count because I keep speaking in public gatherings, and I always think, dang, I ought to have sat down and counted them. I think there are 21 volumes now in the overall series. What you see back there on the back tables is just a part of the project, the Islamic translation series. Shortly after we got started, I got an email from a professor at the Martin Buber Institute for Judaic Studies at the University of Cologne in Germany, who wanted to know if we'd be interested in doing the works of the great rabbi Moses Maimonides in our series. Well, I thought at first, he doesn't fit very well. I mean, a rabbi in an Islamic translation series is a bit of a problem. But then I thought, well, he did write in Arabic, you know. I mean, it makes sense. He lived in Egypt. And then he said something. He said, well, you know, I wanted to give my books to the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, but I saw some of your books, and I'd rather give them to you. And I have to admit that the thought of getting the greatest rabbi of the Middle Ages away from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem was just too good to pass up. And so I said, absolutely, yes, we'll do it. So we're doing the medical works of Moses Maimonides. And then the third shoe to drop, that didn't make any sense. But anyway, unless you're a very odd kind of person. But there was a third leg of the tripod, that'll work. Was to do the Christians, because Islamic society, or if you want to borrow Marshall Hodgson's way of putting it, Islamicate society of the classical period was made up largely by Muslims, but not only by Muslims. Jews and Christians also worked to contribute and create that civilization, and they were important contributors in some way. So to incorporate the contribution of the Eastern Christians was important. And I remember meeting with Father Khalil Samir, a Jesuit priest, who was associated at that point with the Vatican, or with the Pontifical Oriental Institute in Rome, who really encouraged me to include Christians. He said, the trouble is they fall between the chairs. People who study Arabic tend to do it to get at Islam. They want to study Islam, which is true. People who study Christianity don't study Arabic because they think of it as an Islamic language, which is true. But there's a large Christian population in the Middle East that have been speaking Arabic for well over a millennium. They've written a considerable literature, and they basically are understudied. I won't say unstudied, but understudied. And so that was the third part of the project that we got started with, what we call the Eastern Christian Texts Project. And now we have what I wanted it to be, which is a kind of picture of classical Islamic civilization. I remember a leader of the church, Elder Holland, Jeffrey Holland, who was a member of the Quorum of the 12 and a member of the Board of Trustees of BYU, who came down once and was talking with me, and he said, so, this was very early on, he said, well, how many books do you have in mind for this series? 5, 10, something like that? And I said, oh, no, hundreds. That's my dream, that this will be an ongoing project, continuing long after my career is done. The model has always been, I began life as a classics major, the model has always been the Loeb Classical Library, which produces a selection published at Harvard of essentially all of the serious work out of the Greek and Latin worlds, the Greco-Roman worlds. You can get almost anything: literature, art, music, theory, historiography, so on and so forth. And I would like to see something similar for Islamic civilization. With 21 volumes out, you know, we're starting, but it's just barely a start because it's a vast literature with enormous, often enormous books. Actually, I didn't pay any attention to when I started, so you told me to stop after 15 minutes, but I don't know when that'll be. Just kick me. So that's what the project is doing. We have focused largely on Islamic philosophy, theology, mysticism, to a certain extent science, I suppose you could call it. We've done work on Avicenna's physics. We recently published a volume that I think will be one of the more useful. Some of these, truth in advertising, some of them I have to tell you are pretty difficult technical texts. I don't recommend them for just anybody. People say, I want to learn about Islam. Should I get Avicenna's physics? No. No, you should not. That is not a good entree into the world of Islam, or just about anything, actually. It's one of the most difficult texts I've ever read in my life, and it takes a certain kind of special human being to get passionate about a text like that, although I know some who do. But we just published one that I think will actually be useful, and I would like to see mosque libraries get this one. It's a book called, if I can remember the precise title, it's back there, Classical Foundations of Islamic Educational Thought. And it's our first anthology containing essays by various classical thinkers, Ibn Khaldun, for example, or the so-called Brethren of Purity, about education, about how to run a school, things like that. So some of it pretty nuts and bolts kind of stuff. And I have to say, and this is totally, this has no value at all, except I think it's funny. There is probably the greatest sentence, the greatest passage we've ever published in any of these Middle Eastern Text Initiative books is in this volume. It's in an essay by Al-Ghazali, great Islamic thinker and imam. He's talking about students in school, and every teacher has had them, who just can't seem to learn. They just don't pick things up. They're maybe not paying attention. They're not serious. And in the course of his discussion, he cites a statement of Jesus, which is not in the New Testament. And I have to admit, it doesn't sound quite authentic to me, but I kind of hope it is. You'll see why. Because he cites Jesus, he says, "Blessings and peace be upon him," who said, and this is the great sentence, "I have been able to raise the dead, but I have never been able to cure an idiot." Now, I don't know. I like to think maybe on those long walking trips from Capernaum in the north to Jerusalem in the south, maybe there was some chatter along the way, and it wasn't all on the level of the Sermon on the Mount. I thought that's worth the price of the book right there. And it's, the thing is, it goes back to a man who died in 1111, so we're at least half the way to Jesus. Maybe it's authentic. Anyway, the other question I was asked to talk about very quickly is the impact that this project has had. And let me say that it has been a broader impact than I expected. I was initially thinking, Elder Morrison's request was that we do something that show a message of respect to the Islamic world. I think it does that, and I think it's been received as doing that, and I'm very pleased about that. It has also, I think, filled a gap, a very odd gap, in Islamic studies and Western scholarship. It's a very peculiar thing that this had not been done before by anybody. I remember looking around at first and thinking, why has nobody done this? Am I missing something? Am I just too stupid to see? There's some obvious reason for not doing this. I don't know why the gap was there. Partly, I think, because translation has not always enjoyed the highest prestige as scholarship. You're supposed to contribute original thought. The trouble is, of course, most of what we do as original thought is outdated within a few years, probably embarrassing to us and everybody else after a few years have passed away. But these are texts that have stood the test of time for 1,000 years. They're worth translating. It's always seemed to me that our priorities were a little mixed up. These ought to be done. This is important work. So if it were only designed to send a message of respect, I don't think it would have been worth doing. It wouldn't have been sincere. But this is a project worth doing whether anybody picks up a message of respect or not. It's just important to do. It has had an impact. These books, we've deliberately priced them fairly low so they can be used in classrooms. Teachers don't have to apologize or be embarrassed for asking their students to buy them. They're usually in the range of about $30, which for the kind of book they are is remarkably low. Believe me, we are not making a profit on them. I have to go out and still beg money and play the TV evangelist to keep the project going. But I'd rather do that than have the books be too expensive to be used, to be bought by ordinary people. Have they created better relations? They have. And I've been very pleased with it. I remember years ago being invited over to the Islamic Republic of Iran for a conference on a philosopher on whom we've actually published, Mullah Sadra. And it was an interesting experience. When I went, by the way, they gave me a one-way ticket, which for an American going to Iran these days is kind of a, I remember contacting the person in Montreal who was the middleman on this, and I said, "Is this a joke?" I'm interested to go, but I would like to come home. And he said, no, when you get there, we'll give you the return ticket, which they did, and they treated me very well. But one of the most moving experiences for me was to have a group of young college women come up to me and hand me a note in very schoolgirlish English, thanking me for the Islamic translation series. Now, I was pleased by that because, there are not two countries on the face of the planet, really, that are more alienated from one another than the United States and Iran. And yet I thought, in some small way, this has bridged the gap, at least here, in this small case. I remember getting an email from a social worker in Jakarta, Indonesia, who was delighted to see the books, particularly one. He'd always wanted to read Al-Ghazali's Incoherence of the Philosophers, the Tahafut al-Falasifa. But he hadn't been able to because he couldn't read Arabic. He could read English. Now he could. He was delighted. I had not thought before of an audience beyond the academic audience, and it suddenly dawned on me, but of course, There's the Muslim diaspora. There's the large Muslim population that doesn't read Arabic particularly well or at all, but would like to know something about their heritage. Al-Ghazali, Al-Farabi, people like this, the Brethren of Purity, these are part of the legacy, the history of Islam, and they need to understand them. They need to understand, for example, that there's much, much more to Islamic civilization than Ayman al-Zawahiri or Osama bin Laden. These are not the representatives of Islam at its best. Other people are. And this needs to be understood in the West as well. So it has had an impact on bridging gaps, bridging gulfs, and creating a better relationship, I hope. And I could tell you stories. I could multiply stories ad nauseum, as my wife would say, but I won't do that. So the project is ongoing. Some people ask me, is it still happening? Yes, it is. This last year was actually our most productive. Our big problem now is actually an embarrassment of riches, in a sense, in the sense that the more people notice it, the more manuscripts come in, and the more frightened we are. It's both exhilarating and terrifying because essentially the Middle Eastern Text Initiative is myself, an associate, Morgan Davis, and we have a couple of assistants part-time, and that's it. And so when the new manuscripts arrive, it's getting to the point where we have to tell them, gee, we'd love to do this, but it may be 2 or 3 years before we can even get to it. And so part of my appeal here, as it is everywhere, I'm still the TV evangelist. If anybody out there has $100,000 or $1 million or $2 million in his or her pocket, feel free to pass it on, because we need to hire more people and get this thing, keep this thing going. I don't want it to die because of its success. But the fact that it's succeeding, that we have this problem, is a really good thing. Anyway, I think I've used up enough time, so maybe I ought to sit down. That's a little interim report on the project.
I'd like to thank you for giving me an opportunity as well. But if I may just continue on a few words regarding what Dr. Peterson has stated. When I was studying Arabic, and I studied for approximately 7 years, in our class it was always known, one thing you don't do generally is translate from Arabic direct to English for the general audience. And the reason why there is this belief is because, for example, let me quote a hadith for you. In Arabic it says, there is no good luck in women as well as in a horse. Now what are you going to think if you are looking at the translation of that? Wow, women are either equated to horses, number one, or alternatively there is no good luck in women and there is no good luck in horses. But when you examine the hadith and the context of the hadith, actually it says, and the meaning of it is, there is no good luck in a woman that has bad reputation. And as far as the horse is concerned, that animal that cannot be used in an appropriate manner, in a good manner, and cannot be looked after in the manner it ought to be looked after, there is absolutely no good luck in it. And that horse, instead of being a conveyance to you, it will become something that will drop you in a ditch and kill you. Basically, that's what it means. So now, you look at the small hadith that has been mentioned. That's why in classical Arabic text, for example, you'll see a phrase, and that phrase will have sometimes an arrow which directs it to what is known as a hashia. A hashia is actually known as a commentary. So we'll have one little phrase going all the way, pointing an arrow somewhere else, and this guy will be given a whole page commentary on the side regarding that given phrase. So although I applaud the great work that the Prophet is doing, Muslims have always been translating, but they do not bring forth always that translation in fear of what can take place thereafter. As a matter of fact, I was looking at some of the wonderful texts in the back, and I tell you, you have done a great task and a great job at it. I was trying, first I look at the Arabic and I will translate it. I will say one thing, the English is using is a little bit too steep for the translation. But that's fine, he has to keep the academic standards going. In other words, I would have translated it much more simply, but then again, if you give, there's a saying, if you give saffron to a donkey, versus that of a grass to a donkey, it will not be able to tell the difference. So if you make it too simple, the wrong people will pick it up and they'll trivialize it, and we cannot bring down the standards of academia either. Anyway, let me continue with my portion, now that I've taken enough time and went off on a tangent. There are just 4 aspects that I would like to focus on, and these 4 aspects are done for the purposes of bridge building. And in light of what Dr. Peterson had done, I would like to also now use a few Arabic phrases. I wasn't intending to do it, but the reason why I'd like to do it is show you how we do translation from sometimes the complicated to that of the simple, and at the same time show you that translation in itself is not enough for a Muslim. It is translation and also the data, the psychological, the cultural, the social thing that surrounds it. I think that by Dr. Peterson coming first, this idea sharing process will be much more beneficial for myself than at times for you. In other words, I don't care about you. No, I'm just kidding. But so regardless, I'd like to talk a little about Allah, a little about prophets, a little about the benefits of bridge building and the harms of not bridge building prior to my coming to a conclusion. First of all, who is Allah to the Muslims? This is a very important question. Allah is defined in the following manner: that which is most compassionate, most loving, most peaceful. Any good attribute you can think of, that is Allah in His absolute manner. Now there are people that are kind, there are people that are merciful, there are people that are loving. Yes, humans also have these characteristics. However, the characteristics are not absolute in nature. In Bukhari, which is one of the top hadith kitabs, there is the first chapter that starts off with كيف كان بدأ الوحي. How did revelation begin? In that chapter, there is a hadith that talks about niyyah. Niyyah means intention. Simply put, it comes down to the following: whatever you intend in life, that is exactly what you're going to get. It's kind of like the self-fulfilling prophecy. However, Imam Bukhari does something very brilliant thereafter. He doesn't talk, he titles it, I'm going to tell you about revelation, but instead of him telling us about revelation, he throws a wrench in and he quotes an ayah from the Quran. And the ayah of the Quran states, إِنَّا أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْكَ كَمَا أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَى نُوحٍ وَالنَّبِيِّينَ مِنْ بَعْدِهِ وَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَإِسْمَاعِيلَ وَإِسْحَاقَ إِلَى آخِرِ الْآيَةِ. Basically, instead of telling us about revelation, or instead of telling us about how revelation began, he goes off on a tangent and he talks about how revelation came down to Nuh, peace be upon him, known as Noah, Abraham and his children, etc., etc. And one wonders, why did he do that? Imam Bukhari, the author, is trying to tell us folks the following: before you learn hadith, before you learn the traditions of the Prophet, before you begin to understand what various aspects of the Prophet and how it is linked to your religion, I would like you to go and learn about how other prophets had gotten revelation sent down to them. And it is only after you understand the value of what came down to other prophets, whether it is Noah, Abraham, etc., 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 then only you will be able to understand and appreciate the hadith and the tradition of the prophets as well, itself. So now, let us create a bridge between ourselves and other prophets. We spoke about God. There is a prophet in the Quran called Shoayb alayhi salam. What did he say to the people? The Quran says, اُعْبُدُوا اللَّهِ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِي شَيْئًا وَإِلَى مَدْيَنَ أَخَاهُمْ شُعَيْبًا قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مَا لَكُمْ مِنْ إِلَٰهٍ غَيْرُهُ. To the people of Madian, we sent a prophet by the name of Shoayb. And this given prophet had one message amongst the many messages. وَلَا تَنْقُصُوا الْمِكْيَالَ وَالْمِيزَانَ. O my people, after you give yourself to the worship of your Creator, I want you not to cheat. I do not want you to put fake numbers in the back of your license plate. If you need to pay 2011 taxes, then you pay 2011 taxes. You don't go and do something else. In other words, be honest, be fair, do not cheat, do not lie. What they looked at him and said, look here, do you want to become a partner with us or not? We'll give you a couple of bucks, you keep your mouth shut, you do your work and we do our work. That's what basically the people said to him. And his message continued until they sort of marginalized him. Again, God is the focal point, and God sends a messenger, in this case Shoayb, with a message to reform the people. And this is what every messenger has come forth or brought forth. Another prophet, for example, was Noah, since we brought him up. He's building the ark. He's building the ark, and his own family member begins to make fun of him. His son says, Dad, you know, like today's time, how the kids say, Dad, you don't understand. I'm a good guy. I'm going to come home on time. I'm not going to come after 12 o'clock. I don't mean 12 p.m. I'm not going to come after 12 a.m. The father knows better. And this kid in today's time comes up with fancy arguments. Don't you trust me? Don't you this? Don't you that? Likewise, as far as Nuh is concerned, his child tells him, Dad, it doesn't make sense you are building this ark. In fact, you are building something that is so big, all you need is a little speedboat here. The father says, oh my son, worship one creator, number one. Number two, if you are not going to worship, a time will come when you'll go through profound amount of grief. He didn't listen. In fact, what he says, I'll go on the top of the mountain. I'll go on the top of the mountain, and the waves... I'm not saying something that great, am I? Regardless. The waves will not get to me. That's essentially what he's saying. The waves will not get to me. I'll be able to sort of escape this... See, Muslims are not so good people, I'm telling you. I don't know. I guess that's exactly why it happened right now. You're talking of Muslims not being good people. The amount of anxiety people have regarding Muslims is amazing. At our mosque once, there was a group that came, and there was a woman in that group, and she came with a class. Now what happened was on Fridays, my schedule is a little bit impacted, so I was about to walk out. So I introduced myself. I spoke about the commonality between Islam and the LDS faith, since most of them were LDS, and thereafter I parted. And as I was parting, I was very flippant about it. As I was going up, I said something like this. I said, you better be careful. You're in a mosque. You do know that, right? And I continued walking out. Guess what? She went red. She went red. And this is what she said to the person next to her. I think we better get going. I think we better get going. Because of what I had said. And thereafter I came back, I said, no, rest assured. If you have a high level of insurance, then you are fine. Don't worry about it. Your family benefit. This made it even more worse. Anyway, thereafter, the guy said, this guy is a native to the English language. He comes from South Africa. This is the way he is. You know, he has left the bush, but the bush is in him. So don't worry about it. Anyway, later on, she sent me a message saying, you know, I really appreciate you giving us the opportunity to visit, but next time, don't create such fear in me. Let me give you one more example. There was a fellow that came to the mosque, and they had whatever meeting he wanted to have. And as he came out of the mosque, I was coming in from another project. So as I came in, this guy took out his T-shirt, and he threw it in his car, and he's shouting at the one inside, I made it out alive. I made it out alive. So I ran inside and asked the guy, what's going on? What is going on? Did you do something to the guy? He says, no, I didn't do anything. He was very polite. He spent 1 hour here. In other words, when he came in, there were certain fears he had in him. And I guess he was very appreciative that he came out alive. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make is this type of event that we're having, I think it is wonderful, and I think it is supreme. As far as the Quran is concerned, rather than talking about prophets only, the Quran also addresses the Virgin Mary, known as Maryam alayhi salam, one of the most pious and spiritual women. When she brings Jesus, peace be upon her, peace be upon him, when she brings Jesus to the place of residence, what they say, Ya ukhta Harun, ma kana abuki imra'a saw, wa ma kanat ummuki baghiya. The Quran says, Ya ukhta Harun, O sister of Harun. Why does the Quran not address her as, O Maryam? Because in Arabic, when you respect someone, you use the word ya, attributed to it, number one. And number two, rather than taking the person's name, you'll say, "Oh, father of so-and-so," or "Oh, mother of so-and-so," or "Oh, brother of so-and-so." So she's being accused of doing wrongful things when she walks with this child. And the Quran says, "Wassalamu alayya yawma wulidtu," wherein she doesn't know what to say as a result of this accusation that is placed upon her. All she can do is point to the child. And the child speaks from the cradle, basically, essentially saying, "Peace be on the day that I am born, on the day that I will be taken up, and as well as on the day that I'll be brought back down." So as you can see, us understanding these simple things creates greater meaning. One more prophet before I move into the harms and benefits. Abraham is a link to ourselves and many religions out there. The Quran calls Abraham an ummah. Inna Ibrahim kana ummatan qanitan lillahi hanifa. The word ummah means nation, but here it means that this man was so profound in his good deeds that the Quran gave him the position of not just a human, but a human that can do the work of an entire nation. And this is something that gives us solace, tranquility, peace, and motivation. For example, on a spiritual level, he gets up in the morning, or he gets up, and the Quran says, فَلَمَّا رَأَى الْقَمَرَ بَازِغًا فَلَمَّا رَأَى الشَّمْسِ. He sees the sun, he sees the moon, and is beginning to wonder, who is my creator? He sees the sun coming up, the sun going away, the moon coming out, the moon going away. And he says, there is something special about God. God is so great that God doesn't just come and go. God is that entity that remains forever and forever. So behind this moon, sun, stars, whatever it may be, there must be something more. So he's teaching us on how to look for God. Or for example, when he's in conflict with his father. Now we know of conflict between mother and daughter, father and son. How do we resolve it? The Quran talks about it. He says to his father, "Ya abati inni akhafu ay yamassaka adhabu min ar-Rahman." Ya abati, and he continues, "Lima ta'budu ma la yasma'u." Oh my beloved father, oh my beloved father. In different places he says, "Oh my beloved father." Knowing full well that his father is against him, he keeps on saying, how do you worship that which is not going to benefit you? How do you worship that which does not create any benefit for you or for your environment? In other words, even though he's in a hostile environment, when you look at the Quran, it says, لَأَرُجُمَنَّكَ وَهْجُرْنِي مَلِيًّا. Oh my son, essentially, if you don't shut your mouth, I will stone you, I will hurt you, your life will be in jeopardy. What does he say to his father? قَالَ سَلَامٌ عَلَيْكَ سَأَسْتَغْفِرُ لَكَ رَبِّي. Oh my beloved father, all I can say is peace upon you. Until I'm alive, I will continue to seek forgiveness on your behalf. Just a very subtle point here. Ibrahim is hurt that his father doesn't want to communicate effectively with him. God loved what Abraham has done so much so that it is said on the day of reckoning, when you will be able to see me and I will be able to see you. I'm sure you don't want to see me on that day. But anyway, regardless, again, you stuck with me one more time. But suffice to say, God loved Abraham so much that on that day, Ibrahim, when he looks at his father, he will not be able to recognize his father because his father will be concealed from him. Because God does not want Abraham to go through the pain twice of saying, that is my father, I just wish you believed like myself. Anyway, these are little things on how we should continue to deal with one another and use the Abrahamic model for continual growth between ourselves and our society. Now, two more points. What are the harms of not building bridges? There are many. One is continual prejudice, continual ignorance, continual misrepresentation, and misunderstanding. By the way, just for the record, from the day that I've come to Utah up till now, on a weekly basis, there are no less than 150 LDS folks that I come in contact with in some form or the other. Either it is through emails, Either it is through them coming to our mosque, or alternatively them inviting me to their area, whether it is school, etc. And this is a very great learning experience for Muslims. And I wish Muslims learned from this model on how to better interact. For example, I went to a school about 3 or 4 weeks ago. So this time I asked the students, what do you want to know about me? Now, always I don't dress this way. I dress sometimes in a traditional outfit. And I said to them, what do you want to know about me? Tell me. You'll be amazed at the questions they asked. This is what they asked. Do you eat pizza? Serious. Do you play baseball? Do you go swimming? Are you bald under your hat? And by the way, these are not bad questions. These are things that they want to know about because they've been hearing so many negative things. And consistently, whenever parents know that I'm coming to a school, undoubtedly, out of a class of 100 or 200 that I will attend, there has to be at least 2 or 3 parents there. And consistently, the teachers have told me the following. When we call a Catholic preacher down, parents don't come. When we call a rabbi down, parents don't come. But whenever we say we're calling a Muslim scholar down, undoubtedly a few parents will attend. Why? Because the parents want to know what are these, well, first of all, is our child going to come home tonight? And the second is, what weird thing are these people going to say to us? Now, in continuing, now that we spoke about some of the harms and what the harms can do, let us talk about the importance, and thereafter you will be free from my voice. The importance of building bridges and the substance are the following. First of all, we are moving, and we have moved away from the Newtonian model. The Newtonian model basically said, I talk, you listen, or you talk, I listen. That's the way it used to be. Now we have changed, and people of religion too have to realize that our communication models are not linear. Yes, the communication domain teaches us that. Interpersonal, organizational behavior, etc. When we study those fields, we learn that communication is not one way. Unfortunately, as far as religions go, we still think it is one way. I'm the preacher, you are part of the audience, and that's the way it must be. Well, welcome to the 21st century, I say to preachers and imams. Now we have to start a didactic. We have to start a communication which goes back and forth. And this is something that we can never, ever sacrifice. Also, we have to build self-esteem, especially for those individuals that feel marginalized. And the LDS folks can appreciate this sentiment tremendously. And what I say here is, first of all, we have to understand our value. And Muslims do not understand their value. That's why they do wrongful things. So they have to be taught the value of themselves, the value of their religion, the value of bridging and what you call is going on a common platform and appreciating one another, not just for the differences, but primarily for the commonality. Also, we have to create shared meaning. These are things that organizations are doing on a continual basis. Well, organizations are doing it because they have money at stake. While folks, regarding religion, we have lives at stake. And we need not say any further regarding that. Also, finally, I'd like to conclude by saying that the traditional methods of communication are coming to an end, such as writing just books alone, or listening to certain authors. Like, for example, there is that thing of, whose book are you reading? Or, for example, in the case of Dr. Peterson's work, they'll ask me, if I have to quote him, they'll say, whose translation are you looking at? Is he an Orientalist? This is a big thing that comes on. Now we have to realize it doesn't matter whether you're an Orientalist or not. The reality is this. There are blogs out there. There are different systems of communication we use. So if I don't like what Dr. Peterson is saying, I will take his translation, I'll put it through a different search, or I will go to someone else and say, what do you have to say about this, or how do you translate it? Once we see that sensitivity and commonality, then automatically my audience will say, well, Dr. Peterson's work is great. We should go towards it. And once they see a disparity, they will begin to say, there is something sinister going on. Let us further examine it. Again, in conclusion, I thank Dr. Boyd for giving me an opportunity to sort of become a 20 or 30 minute of misery towards you. If you've got a problem, you go to Dr. Boyd regarding that. Also, I'd like to thank the LDS folks repeatedly for always inviting me to the different projects. As I say, I learned a lot more from you than you have ever learned from me, and I cannot thank you sincerely for giving me an opportunity continually to witness. And I say witness, see, one is I witness. I just see this is a water bottle. But the other is, it's a water bottle. It's H2O. It has chemistry linked to it, and many, many components linked to it. So likewise, I thank you all for giving me an opportunity to be part of this event, to give me an opportunity to witness what you are very much part of. And I thank you for all the good that you do. And all I can say is continue doing it, because lives are being changed by this. And again, thank you and God bless.
So we've reached the end of our hour, but I think we have time for one or maybe two questions we don't want to go over on the other session.
I absolutely loved both presentations. My question is for both of you, but primarily for you. I loved what you talked about going into the schools with the children. And as you were kind of, you know, when they're asking you, do you like pizza? I wish we were so much more like children. So with the successes that you have had, that you are having in the Salt Lake community, how would you kind of modify or use that model to kind of talk to the rest of the world? I do politics. I'm back east studying politics. And my concern is that, you know, we don't hear the primary sources. We don't read those books that you're translating. The snippets that we're getting are from popular TV shows where it's so bizarre. How do you get that authentic primary voice into the broad? I'm a firm believer, if my friends, Tea Party friends, no, I'm just kidding. If my friends that I work with in politics were to sit down and meet the people that I meet as I've worked with the Muslim community through the years, they would just love them, and we would all be, you know, singing and whatever. We'd be very happy. But how can you translate that model that you are having success to the broader context of what's going on in mainstream? Both of you, I guess. Thanks.
In the essence of time, I will keep it very short. One is the Quran says, سَوَاءٍ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمْ أَلَّا نَعْبُدَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. And this is simple again. Try to create commonality. Rather than looking for differences, see where we can create a meeting of the minds. That's very, very important. Now, we know this from a religious perspective. However, in as far as current issues are concerned, we are ruled, unfortunately, by certain political situations and motives. And we will not go into the discussion of foreign policy, etc. So these things are also having an impact upon us. So people themselves have to distinguish and bring about a slight separation between the person and the politics. Understand that there are certain foreign policy issues that have to be addressed, but whilst they are being addressed, let us look for areas of similarity. And I think if people look at it this way, there'll be much more bridge building than bridge collapses.
Yeah, I think that one of the most important things that needs to be done is simply more conferences, more discussions like this, more interfaith activities, more lectures, more visits by imams to schools, more visits by LDS congregations or others to mosques, so on and so forth. Getting to know people as people, to see them as real people rather than caricatures is really important. But I think more important than talking with one another is working side by side, and there are a lot of areas of commonality where we can work together. Take, for example, people on the conservative end of the political spectrum. They will probably not agree with Muslims on some foreign policy issues. There will be disagreements often between people on the right and Muslims about, say, U.S. policy in the Arab-Israeli conflict. But they will probably see eye to eye on certain social issues. They can work together on those things. The fact is, I don't agree with anybody around me completely. But I can work with other people on different issues and find out that actually they're valuable people, they're good people, they mean well, even if I don't agree with them. And so I think there's a lot of work that we can do together where we can work side by side. And you get to know and appreciate people more that way than just by by jabbering at them, by talking at them, talking back and forth. Actually working together in a cause that's bigger than either of us is a really important thing to do.
I was excited and pleased to hear that you were invited to the school. You are welcome to the school. I did not hear about any parents keeping children home from the school as they did about our president.
Any response? Any other questions?
Anyway, I don't have a question. Actually, I have a comment. I'm a student. I'm from Jordan. I just came for a year here at UVU. You know, as someone from the Middle East coming to the States, I had all these weird ideas. I was so scared. Like, as Americans are scared from Muslims, Muslim as well as they have these ideas about Americans as well. So simple things are really could be convenient and could be very helpful to bridge these gaps and these stereotypes and between Muslims and Christian. Yeah, for example, like here in the UVU, I will be more than welcomed if like anyone stop me and ask me about why you're wearing this, why, for example, what your religion is about, what your ideas. Sometimes you don't have really to talk about politics, about Osama bin Laden or terrorism or anything. Just simple things like daily life dialogues are more than enough to make you understand the other person. At the end, we're human beings, you know. We have things in common more than things like we have things in common more than differences, like simple things. Just like, for example, my in-laws' family all of them are Mormons. They are conservative. They worship, you know, they have different things. I really completely respect and understand. And the opposite side, they understand me and they respect me. And we have things, sometimes we go in discussions about similarities and differences. And with each time I talk to them, I discover we are very close, especially when you talk about come to Mormonism and Islam. We have very things in common, like so many things in common. Sometimes not only like how to worship or how to do specific things, but when it comes to that ideology itself, it's very similar. So I think when you're like, if daily life conversations with Muslims will be more than enough for you to try to understand them and be closer to them. Thank you.
Okay, well, let's give one more hand to our two presenters.